The alien king offered all the gold in the galaxy, but he only wanted the prisoner forgotten for 200 years. The air of Vathra shimmered with a metallic hue, as if the very atmosphere carried fragments of broken stars. From the cliffs that overlooked the crimson deserts, the spires of the alien capital rose like jagged teeth, obsidian towers threaded with veins of glowing silver. To most humans, this world would have felt like a nightmare. To Daniel Hayes, born in Houston, Texas, it was the stage of a bargain that could end his life. Daniel had never wanted to leave Earth. He'd been an engineer, the kind of man who fixed things quietly in his garage, a coffee mug always on the workbench. But war changed him. When the Verikai ships first blotted out Earth's sky, his courage had been tested. He never imagined that courage would lead him across light years, standing now in the throne hall of the king who was not human at all. The throne room was carved directly into the heart of a black mountain. Firelight bled from massive braziers, each flame blue, crackling like plasma. Soldiers in polished armor lined the walls, their faces hidden behind masks shaped like predatory birds. At the end of the chamber sat the alien king, tall, angular, his skin the color of burnished iron, his eyes molten gold. Around his neck hung chains of jewels that pulsed with inner light, as though they contained caged suns. When the king spoke, the chamber seemed to vibrate. "You are a curious creature, human," the king said, his voice rolling like thunder. "You fought when others begged. You bled when others surrendered. For that, I owe you a reward." Daniel's throat was dry, but he stood his ground. He had crossed deserts of glass, survived storms of acid rain, and endured the stares of soldiers who wanted him dead. Now all eyes were on him. The king raised one clawed hand. Immediately, attendants carried forward vessels of raw gold, molten, glowing, still steaming from the forge. They set them down in a glittering pile at Daniel's feet. The hall gasped, not because of the treasure itself, but because of what it meant. This was a gift reserved for kings, not mortals. "All the wealth of Vathra," the king declared. "Yours, if you wish. Take it. With such riches, you could return to your world and rule it." Daniel's eyes drifted over the shimmering gold, but his heart wasn't in it. His gaze had already found something else, hidden in the shadows of the chamber. There, behind a column, barely illuminated by the blue flames, was a figure chained to the wall. She was kneeling, her wrists bound by cuffs that glowed faintly, feeding energy into the chains themselves. Her skin was the color of sapphires under moonlight, her hair a cascade of blonde silk that had grown wild and tangled with time. Even in captivity, even half-starved, she radiated something fierce and unbroken. Her eyes opened as if she had felt his attention. They were silver, catching the firelight with an intensity that seemed almost painful. For a brief second, Daniel swore she looked straight through him, into him, as if she knew his name before he even spoke. An attendant noticed his gaze and sneered. "That one, she is nothing. A prisoner of forgotten wars. 200 years she has knelt there. She is no reward." Daniel stepped forward, ignoring the gold. The chamber fell silent. He lifted his hand, not to the treasure, not to the glittering vessels, but toward the chained woman. His voice was steady, though every soldier's grip on their weapon tightened. "I want her." The words hung in the air like a blade. Murmurs rippled through the alien court. Some laughed nervously. Others looked horrified. Choosing a prisoner over the king's wealth was more than unusual. It was dangerous. The king leaned forward, his molten eyes narrowing. "You would refuse my gold for her." Daniel's chest tightened. He thought of Earth, his mother's old diner in Houston, the sound of baseball games on summer nights, the simple warmth of human laughter. Those things had been worth fighting for. But here, in this alien palace, he knew instinctively that if he walked away from the girl in chains, he would never be able to call himself human again. "Yes," he said. "Her." The king studied him for a long time. Then, with a slow, booming laugh that shook the walls, he rose from his throne. "Perhaps humans are not as predictable as I thought." The soldiers shifted uneasily. Daniel's eyes stayed locked on the girl. In her expression, half disbelief, half defiance, he saw not just a prisoner, but a spark. Something alive, waiting for someone, anyone, to remember her. And in that moment, Daniel Hayes of the United States realized his fight was only beginning. The chamber erupted the moment Daniel's words struck the air. The laughter that followed wasn't kind. It was jagged, sharp, the sound of predators circling prey. The soldiers of Vathra shifted like a single living wall, hands tightening on their halberds of burning steel. Blasphemy, one of them hissed in their alien tongue. Another spat something Daniel didn't understand, though he caught the venom in the tone. The prisoner was no treasure. She was a curse. The king, however, did not strike him down. He reclined on his throne, golden eyes gleaming with something halfway between amusement and intrigue. The human refuse is gold, the monarch mused aloud, as though narrating the absurdity for the court. He wants chains instead. Tell me, Daniel of Earth, do you even know what she is? Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away. The truth was he didn't. All he knew was the way she had looked at him, like someone who had been forgotten by the universe but had not yet surrendered. That look had been enough to make him defy a king. She's not yours to rot away, Daniel finally said. His accent, the flat, American vowels of Texas, seemed crude against the alien grandeur of the hall, but his words cut through the noise with brutal simplicity. The king's lips curled in something like a smile. Courage, he rumbled, or stupidity. You humans blur the line so well. He rose, the movement shaking the very stones of the throne dais. Every soldier bowed their head in automatic reverence. Daniel stood still. The girl in chains lifted her head, her silver eyes locked on him. She is not a reward, the king said. She is punishment. The court fell silent. Even the flames in the braziers seemed to dim. The king gestured toward her. 2 centuries ago, she betrayed the Verakai. She sided with our enemies, whispered to them secrets of our star forges, and condemned our fleets to ruin. For that, she was chained. Time has broken most who shared her fate. But she, he paused, his gaze lingering on her face. She endures. She endures too well. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The story wasn't new. Many in the court had grown up hearing it. The traitor princess, they called her in whispers. The woman who had once walked among kings and had been cast down. Daniel's stomach tightened. He hadn't expected this. A traitor? And yet, when he looked at her again, he saw no malice. Only the sharpness of a will that refused to shatter. She deserves freedom, Daniel said quietly. That sentence turned the chamber colder than any winter storm. Several soldiers actually laughed, not out of amusement this time, but disbelief. To free her was unthinkable. The king tilted his head, studying him like a scientist might study a dangerous specimen. Why? You know nothing of her. She could slit your throat the moment you remove her chains. Maybe, Daniel admitted. But if that's what she wanted, she would have let her eyes go dead a long time ago. They're not dead. Not yet. It was madness, saying these things aloud. He knew it, but silence would have meant betraying something inside himself. He hadn't fought alien soldiers on Earth, just to bow and scrape now. The king's laughter rolled like thunder. Interesting. Very interesting. You humans cling to your strange ideals. Fine. You want her. Then you must earn her. The chamber trembled as the king slammed his staff against the floor. The sound echoed through the stone like a drumbeat of war. Trial by storm, he declared. The soldiers roared approval, pounding their weapons against their armor. Daniel frowned. Trial by what? The king's grin widened, revealing sharp teeth. If you would claim the prisoner, you must survive our judgment. Outside these walls, the storms of Vathra rage. They carve canyons, rip flesh from bone, melt steel into rivers. You will walk into it. You will endure. And if you crawl back alive, she will be yours. Daniel's blood ran cold. He had seen those storms from a distance, lightning the color of violet fire tearing the skies, winds that could rip ships apart. They weren't weather. They were weapons. He looked at the prisoner again. For the first time, her lips parted. Her voice, hoarse from disuse, carried across the silence of the chamber. Don't, she whispered. One word, fragile as broken glass. But it hit him harder than the king's decree. Daniel's chest tightened. She wasn't pleading for herself. He could tell. She was warning him. She didn't want him to die for her. But that made his decision clearer, not weaker. He took a slow breath, then raised his head toward the throne. I'll do it. The king's laughter shook the hall again. Good. Very good. The storm will show if your heart is iron, or if you're only dust. The soldiers began to chant, pounding their weapons in rhythm. The chains rattled as the girl bowed her head once more, her golden hair falling like a curtain. But even as she looked down, her silver eyes flicked back toward Daniel, shining with something raw. Shock, fear, and beneath both, a flicker of something dangerously close to hope. Daniel clenched his fists. He hadn't asked for this trial. He hadn't asked to become some gladiator in a foreign myth. But he knew one thing. He would walk into that storm, not for glory, not for treasure, but because a human had given his word. And in a hall filled with warriors who had forgotten what honor meant, that was enough to terrify them. The gates of the fortress opened with a sound like the cracking of mountains. Black stone doors split apart, and the roar of Vaethra's storm rushed inward like an enraged beast. Winds howled through the gap, carrying sparks of violet lightning that snapped and crawled across the air as if alive. The soldiers cheered, eager for blood. Daniel stood at the threshold, his clothes already whipping in the gale. He tightened the straps of the alien armor they had given him. Lightweight, almost ceremonial, its metal etched with symbols he couldn't read. It wasn't protection. It was a shroud, a costume for his death march. Behind him, the throne hall was filled with watching eyes. The king leaned forward, golden gaze burning. The chained girl, her silver eyes unblinking, was still kneeling, but Daniel could feel the intensity of her stare even as the storm pulled at him. He turned once more toward her, just a glance. But in that glance, he thought he read something in her expression. Not despair, not warning this time, but a kind of reluctant faith, as though she couldn't stop him, but she was willing him to prove her wrong about the futility of hope. Daniel stepped into the storm. The instant he crossed the threshold, the world tried to tear him apart. Wind slammed into him with the force of a speeding truck, driving him to his knees. Dust and shards of obsidian cut across his face like knives. The sky above was a shifting ocean of violet fire, lightning arcing sideways, downward, spiraling like serpents hunting prey. Each strike hit the ground with explosions that shook the earth. Jesus Christ, Daniel muttered through gritted teeth. His voice was swallowed immediately by the howl. He forced himself forward, step by brutal step, boots sinking into sand that glowed faintly with heat. The storm wasn't just weather. It was alive, deliberate, testing. He felt the static in his bones, crawling under his skin, whispering promises of how easily he could be reduced to ash. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back. But turning back wasn't an option. Not with the entire alien court watching. Not with her chained in the shadows, condemned for 2 centuries. An hour might have passed, or maybe minutes. Time was shredded by the violence of the storm. Daniel had long since lost feeling in his hands, his muscles trembling from the constant battering. He stumbled across jagged rock, narrowly avoiding a crack that split open under a lightning strike, spewing molten stone. He fell once, catching himself on his hands. Pain flared, but he dragged himself upright. Not today, he growled, voice nearly stolen by the wind. Another bolt struck nearby, throwing him backward. He hit the ground hard, air leaving his lungs in a ragged gasp. His ears rang, his vision swam. For a moment, the world blurred, and in that blur he thought he saw her face. The girl's silver eyes, staring at him, as though reaching across the storm itself. "Get up," the vision whispered. Daniel coughed, spitting blood into the sand. His body screamed, but he planted his hands and shoved himself upright again. He staggered onward. The trial wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Whispers carried in the gale, voices that weren't his own. They taunted him with memories. The night sky over Houston when the alien ships first appeared, the screams of neighbors as streets burned, the moment he chose to fight instead of flee. "You could have had gold," the voices hissed. "Enough to buy your home back, to rebuild everything. And you threw it away for her. For a stranger." Daniel's fists clenched. He pushed forward, refusing to answer, refusing to give the storm what it wanted. Then the ground shifted. A fissure split open ahead of him, a canyon dropping in a glowing magma. The storm's winds howled downward, sucking debris into the fire below. Daniel staggered to the edge, staring at the impossible gap. There was no bridge, only jagged rocks that might serve as a path, if he was willing to risk falling. He didn't hesitate. His first jump carried him to the nearest ledge. It crumbled under his weight, sending shards into the abyss. He leapt again, catching himself on a sharp outcropping, the skin of his palms tearing open. Blood slicked his grip, but he held. One more jump. His legs screamed. The wind shoved at him like a living wall. He pushed anyway, throwing himself across the final gap. He landed hard on his stomach, chest slamming into stone, but he was across. For a moment, he just lay there, the storm howling above, heart pounding. Then he rolled onto his back and laughed, a raw, broken sound that was half madness, half triumph. "You're not taking me that easy," he muttered. Hours, maybe more, passed. By the time he stumbled back toward the fortress gates, Daniel was barely standing. His clothes were torn, his skin cut and burned, his lips cracked from heat and dust. His body moved on sheer stubbornness, nothing more. But he was alive. The gates opened once more. Soldiers fell silent as the humans staggered inside, lightning still flashing behind him. The king rose slowly from his throne, eyes gleaming with something that almost looked like respect. "You walked the storm," the king said. His voice carried over the hushed hall. "Few of my own warriors have done the same." Daniel's vision swam. He tasted iron in his mouth, but through the blur, he saw her, still chained, still on her knees. And this time, her silver eyes widened, her lips parting in something he had never seen in them before. Hope. He managed a grin through blood and exhaustion. "Told you," he rasped. "Not today." The court erupted in chaos, half shouting for his execution, half demanding he be honored. But Daniel no longer heard them. His gaze was locked only on her. For the first time in 2 centuries, she dared to believe freedom was possible. And for Daniel Hayes, battered and half dead, that belief was worth every wound. The hall thundered with noise. Soldiers clashed their weapons against the floor. Advisors shouted at the throne. The air vibrated with arguments in alien tongues Daniel couldn't decipher. To them, his survival was impossible, an insult to their gods and traditions. And yet, there he stood. Daniel's chest burned with every breath, his body bruised and bleeding, but his head was unbowed. He had walked through the storm and returned alive. That alone was enough to unnerve them. The king raised his hand, and silence fell like a blade. He endured. By our laws, the storm has spoken. The human has earned what he claimed. A ripple of unease spread through the chamber. All eyes turned to the prisoner, the girl who had knelt in chains for 200 years. Her hair caught the light of the braziers, golden strands tangled and matted, yet still radiant against the deep sapphire of her skin. She was trembling now, not with fear, but with the shock of hearing words she never thought possible. Daniel met her gaze. "You're free," he said, voice hoarse. The king's mouth curved in a slow, deliberate smile. "Are you so certain, human? Freedom is not so simple. This one carries the blood of betrayal. 2 centuries ago, she nearly shattered my empire. To hand her to you now is dangerous." "I don't care what she did 200 years ago," Daniel shot back. His voice carried across the hall, sharp with conviction. "I only care what she is now. And right now, she's a prisoner. That ends today." Gasps. Murmurs. Even some of the soldiers looked shaken. The king studied him for a long moment. Then, with a slow gesture, he struck the floor with his staff. The chains around the girl's wrists shimmered, glowing hotter and hotter until they shattered, fragments of light scattering like dying stars. She flinched at the release, her arms dropping limply to her sides. For the first time in 2 centuries, her skin was unmarked by bonds. She rose slowly, unsteady, every eye fixed on her. Daniel stepped forward instinctively, ready to catch her if she fell. She met him halfway, her silver eyes gleaming with disbelief, pain, and something fragile, something dangerous, hope. But before their moment could settle, a voice cut through the hall. "This is madness." The outcry came from one of the king's generals, a towering figure clad in crimson armor. His eyes blazed with fury as he pointed a clawed finger at Daniel. "He has bewitched you, Majesty. Do you not see? This human is no savior. He is a thief. He steals what should remain chained." Others joined the chorus, shouting in agreement. A wave of unrest rolled through the hall. The king's eyes narrowed. Enough. His voice was soft, but it carried the force of thunder. Silence fell once more, though resentment still hung thick in the air. The general did not back down. His voice dropped low, venomous. If she leaves these walls, Majesty, the stars will bleed again. Do not forget who she is. Daniel turned toward him. Then maybe you should remember she's still a person. The general sneered. A person? She is a weapon. A traitor. 200 years have not cleansed her sins. At that, the girl finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, raw from disuse, but steady enough to cut through the noise. My name, she said, is Elora. The hall froze. Some gasped. Others spat curses. Elora. The name itself was legend. Mothers whispered it to frighten children into obedience. Soldiers cursed it when remembering lost comrades. Elora the betrayer. Elora the fallen. But now she was no story. She was flesh and blood, standing beside the human who had claimed her freedom. Daniel looked at her, repeating the name softly, as though engraving it into memory. Elora. Her silver eyes softened just slightly. For the first time in 2 centuries, someone had said her name not as a curse, but as a promise. The general snarled. This cannot stand. If the king will not act, then I will. He drew his blade, a weapon forged of living fire, the edge flickering with energy. The soldiers around him shifted, waiting. Daniel instinctively moved closer to Elora, his battered body tensing. He had no weapon, no armor worth trusting, but he would not let anyone touch her. The king rose, staff slamming against the stone. Enough, general. His eyes burned, molten fury spilling in every word. This human has earned his claim, and she is his. By the storm, so it shall be. The general froze, jaw tight. His blade trembled with suppressed rage, but at last he sheathed it, bowing stiffly. As you command, Majesty. The moment passed, but Daniel knew it wasn't over. That general's eyes promised violence later, violence outside the king's watch. Still, he turned back to Elora. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't name. Gratitude, yes, but also confusion, as though she couldn't fathom why anyone, especially a human stranger, would endure a storm for her. Daniel forced a weary smile. Guess you're stuck with me now. Her lips parted, the hint of something like a laugh breaking through, though it never fully formed. You're insane, she whispered. Yeah, he admitted, but sometimes that's what it takes. That night, long after the court dispersed, Daniel sat in a chamber they had been given, a place that felt more like a gilded cage than true sanctuary. Elora stood near the window slit, her eyes scanning the storms outside. They'll come for us, she said quietly. You don't understand what you've done. My name, it carries more enemies than you can count. Daniel leaned back against the wall, exhaustion dragging at him. Then I guess we'll just have to survive them. Together. Her silver gaze softened again, though her voice stayed guarded. You don't even know me. Daniel shook his head. Doesn't matter. I know chains don't belong on anyone, and I know you're worth more than 200 years of silence. For the first time, Elora closed her eyes, breathing in as if tasting freedom she had forgotten. When she opened them again, there was the faintest spark, fragile but real. The story was far from over. Their survival, their connection, their fight for freedom, it had only just begun. And as Daniel lay down, battered but alive, he realized something simple but unshakable. He hadn't chosen Elora because she was beautiful or mysterious or legendary. He had chosen her because no one else would. And sometimes that was the only choice that mattered. If you've ever rooted for an impossible love, if you've ever wanted to see someone fight against a universe stacked against them, don't stop here. Subscribe for more stories like this, because Daniel and Elora's fight is only beginning. The morning after the trial, Vaethra's sky bled violet light through the narrow window slits of the guest chamber. The storms were quieter than the night before, as if even the planet itself was holding its breath. Daniel sat on the floor, bandaging his torn hands with strips of cloth. His muscles ached like they'd been forged on an anvil, every joint swollen, every cut stinging. But it wasn't the pain that unsettled him. It was the silence. Elora hadn't spoken since dawn. She stood near the far wall, her bare feet brushing against the stone floor, her silver eyes fixed on the horizon. Chains no longer bound her wrists, but she still carried herself like someone braced for shackles to snap back into place. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "You don't have to keep looking over your shoulder. The king said you're free." Her laugh was soft and sharp at once, like glass breaking. "Kings speak. Courts whisper louder. Do you really think it ends with words in a throne room?" Daniel tied off the bandage, then pushed himself to his feet. He walked closer, ignoring the stiffness in his legs. "What I think," he said, "is that you've been waiting 2 centuries for someone to stand in front of you instead of turning away. That's not nothing." She turned her head, finally meeting his gaze. For a moment, the coldness in her eyes wavered. Then it hardened again. "You don't know what I've done, human. You don't know what they'll do to you for standing with me." Daniel shrugged, though the weight in his chest was heavy. "Guess I'll find out." The door burst open. 2 guards stormed in, their armor glinting like polished obsidian. Behind them strode the crimson-armored general, the same one who had nearly defied the king in front of the court. His expression was venomous, lips curled back as though even looking at Daniel poisoned his blood. "You," the general snarled, jabbing a clawed finger toward Daniel. "The king may have spared your life last night, but don't mistake his curiosity for mercy. You've stolen a relic of war from her rightful prison." Ellora stiffened. Daniel instinctively moved between her and the general. "She's not a relic," Daniel said. "She's a person." The general's eyes narrowed. "You dare lecture me in my own tongue? You think walking through a storm makes you untouchable? The storm is nothing compared to what's coming." Ellora's voice cut through like a blade. "Enough, Reeker." The general froze, his jaw tightening at the sound of his name on her lips. Rage and something deeper, something like fear, flickered across his face. "Don't speak as if we are equals," he hissed. "You forfeited that when you betrayed us." Daniel glanced back at Ellora, but her face was unreadable, cold as the stones around them. Betrayal. The word still stung every time it was thrown at her, and yet she didn't flinch. Reeker leaned closer to Daniel, his voice a growl. "The king may shield you today, human, but outside these walls, neither of you will live long. My soldiers whisper of blood. The people cry for vengeance, and I will be waiting when the king's patience runs dry." He turned sharply, his cape whipping behind him, and left with his guards. The chamber was silent again, but the silence was heavier now, thick with the promise of violence yet to come. Daniel exhaled slowly. "He's not bluffing." "No," Ellora said quietly. "He's not." That evening, the king summoned them. The throne hall was emptier this time. Fewer courtiers, fewer soldiers, but the weight of the king's presence still pressed on the air. His molten eyes studied them as they approached, staff resting against the arm of his throne. "You survived the storm," the king said to Daniel. "You freed the betrayer. But survival is not the end, human. It is only the beginning. Do you understand what you have taken into your hands?" Daniel glanced at Ellora, then back at the king. "Yeah, I understand enough." The king's laughter was low, rumbling. "Then hear this. There are those beyond these walls who will never accept her release. Already, whispers of rebellion stir. Blood may flow because of you." "Then let it," Daniel said flatly. The king's eyes glowed brighter. "You speak boldly for one so fragile. Perhaps it is why I find you amusing. But amusement will not protect you. If you wish your freedom to last, you must leave Vaethra. Tonight." Daniel's heart pounded. "Leave." The king nodded once. "Go. Take her beyond my reach, before my people force my hand. You wanted her. Now you will carry her. But know this. Every star system remembers her name. Ellora's shadow is long, and wherever you flee, it will follow." Daniel turned toward Ellora. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tight, as though she had expected this all along. "You knew," Daniel whispered. She met his gaze. "Freedom is never free. Not for me. Not for you." That night, under the violet storm skies, Daniel and Ellora slipped through the fortress gates with little more than the clothes on their backs. The city beyond was alive with alien lights, towers gleaming against the darkness, markets still buzzing with activity. But in every corner, Daniel felt eyes on them. Whispers, hatred, fear. They kept moving. At the edge of the city, they found a small docking yard filled with battered ships, traders, smugglers, wanderers. Daniel led Ellora toward one that looked half broken but space-worthy enough. The owner, a wiry alien with rust-colored skin, eyed Elora suspiciously, but said nothing once Daniel pressed a pouch of stolen gold into his hand. As they boarded, Daniel glanced back at the city. The fortress spires loomed like jagged knives against the storm-lit sky. He knew this wasn't over. Reeker would come. Others would follow. They weren't just fugitives. They were targets. Elora sank into the corner of the small cabin, her golden hair falling across her face. For the first time, Daniel saw the exhaustion in her bones, the weight of centuries. "You don't have to come with me," she murmured. "You could walk away now. Live." Daniel sat across from her, his body aching, but his voice steady. "I didn't fight a storm just to walk away. You're stuck with me, Elora. Get used to it." Her lips parted in the faintest trace of a smile. Small, almost invisible, but real. Outside, the engines rumbled. The ship lifted into the storm-heavy sky. Behind them, an empire watched. Ahead of them, the galaxy waited. And between them, just two souls, broken and unbowed. The spark of something that could burn brighter than any gold. The ship groaned as it tore free of Vaethra's atmosphere, rattling like it might collapse at any moment. The engines coughed violet fire, sputtering under the strain, but somehow, against all odds, it carried them upward into the night. Daniel sat in the cockpit, hands gripping unfamiliar controls. He wasn't a pilot. He'd flown nothing more complicated than drones back on Earth. But instinct and stubbornness guided him now, each lever and switch a gamble. Elora sat beside him, silent, her gaze fixed on the shrinking planet below. Chains no longer bound her, yet her shoulders were tense, her jaw clenched. 200 years of captivity didn't vanish in a night. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "You ever flown one of these things before?" She turned her silver eyes toward him, the faintest trace of surprise flickering there. "Once. Long ago." "Good," Daniel muttered, half smiling. "Because I have no idea what I'm doing." Her lips curved, not quite a smile, but close enough to ease the tension. She leaned forward, her slender fingers brushing his as she reached for the controls. Her touch was cool, almost electric. "Steady here," she murmured, adjusting a lever. "Ease the thrusters before they tear themselves apart." He followed her guidance, and the ship's shuddering eased. For a moment, their hands rested together on the controls. Neither moved. Then Elora pulled back, her expression guarded again. Daniel let out a breath. "So, 200 years in chains. You gotta hate everyone after that. But when you looked at me back there, you didn't look like someone who hated." Elora's eyes darkened. "Hate keeps you alive. Hope keeps you weak. I tried to bury hope a long time ago." Daniel leaned back, watching her carefully. "Looks to me like hope buried itself in you anyway. Otherwise, you'd have let yourself die." Her jaw tightened. She turned away, staring out the viewport at the streaking stars. "You don't know what I've done. If you did, you wouldn't sit this close." "Try me," Daniel said. Silence stretched between them. The hum of the engines filled the void. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, each word heavy. "I betray my people. Not for greed. Not for power. For peace. I gave secrets to their enemies, thinking war would end. Instead, more worlds burned. I carry that blood every day." Daniel studied her. She didn't flinch under his gaze, though her shoulders trembled ever so slightly. She expected condemnation, maybe even fear. Instead, he said, "So you try to stop a war, and it blew up in your face. That doesn't sound like a monster to me. That sounds human." Her head snapped toward him, eyes flashing. "Don't you dare compare me to your kind. I destroyed more lives than you can imagine." Daniel held her gaze, unflinching. "Then spend the rest of your life saving what you can. You don't erase the past. You outlive it." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then Elora exhaled, the tension in her shoulders softening just slightly. "You're impossible," she whispered. Daniel smirked. "So I've been told." Hours passed. They drifted through the void, the ship humming faintly around them. Daniel finally dozed in the pilot's chair, exhaustion dragging him under. Elora watched him. His face, bruised and cut from the storm, looked softer in sleep. Vulnerable, fragile in a way her people would have sneered at. And yet, he had stood in front of her when no one else would. He had walked into a storm for a stranger. He had spoken her name without spitting it like venom. Her chest tightened with something she hadn't felt in centuries. Something dangerous. She rose quietly, pulling a thin blanket from the supply bin. She draped it over him with careful hands. His eyes twitched beneath his lids, but he didn't wake. For a long time, she stood there, staring at the human who had gambled everything on her. "Fool," she whispered softly, but her voice trembled with something that wasn't contempt. The quiet didn't last. The ship's sensors blared, jolting Daniel awake. Red lights flashed across the console. Elora was already moving, her fingers dancing across the controls. "What is it?" Daniel demanded. "Pursued," Elora said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes narrowed in recognition as the readings scrolled across the screen. "Reeker." Daniel's blood went cold. "That general? Already?" Elora nodded grimly. "He won't stop. He'll chase us across the stars if he has to." The comm crackled. A guttural voice filled the cabin, dripping with fury. "Human. Traitor. There is no escape. Surrender her, and I may let you die quickly." Daniel slammed a fist against the console. "Not happening." Elora glanced at him, silver eyes wide. Something in his voice, unshakable, reckless, stubborn, ignited a flicker in her chest. For 2 centuries she had been alone, drowning in silence. Now, for the first time, she wasn't. "Then hold steady," she said, gripping the controls. "If we're to survive, we'll survive together." Daniel met her gaze. And in that moment, battered and hunted, there was no storm, no chains, no galaxy of enemies. Only the fragile, dangerous beginning of trust. The void around them split with fire. Reeker's warship dropped out of the fold, its hull a dagger of obsidian, edges glowing like fresh magma. Cannons swiveled, and the first volley screamed through the darkness. Plasma lit up the black as the fragile vessel Daniel and Elora clung to jerk sideways, alarms shrieking. "Evasive," Elora barked, hands flying across the controls. Daniel braced against the shaking hull, sweat stinging his eyes. The ship spun, scraping the edge of an asteroid belt that shimmered like broken glass. Shards of ice and rock whirled past, some colliding with the shields, sparking bright flares. Behind them, Reeker's ship pursued without mercy, each blast a thunderclap in the silence of space. "He's hurting us," Elora hissed. "Toward the grave spiral. If we enter, there's no coming back." Daniel squinted at the star map, flashing red warnings across the console. A cluster of collapsed stars tangled with magnetic fields and debris. "A death trap. Then we don't enter," he snapped. "We fight." Elora froze, then looked at him with something between awe and fury. "Fight him. That ship could wipe out a fleet. You have 1 cannon, barely functional." "Sometimes one's enough," Daniel shot back. "Especially if you're stubborn enough." Reeker's voice cracked over the comms, deep and venomous. "Give her to me, human. You cannot save her. You cannot even save yourself." Daniel slammed the transmit button. His voice rang hard, defiant. "Come and take her." For a heartbeat, silence. Then Reeker's laughter rolled across the channel like thunder. The next volley nearly tore the hull apart. Sparks rained from the ceiling. Daniel dove across the cabin, gripping Elora's arm. "Show me what this crate can do. You know it better than me. Together, we've got a shot." For 2 centuries, she had carried her guilt alone. Now she met his eyes and nodded. They moved as one. Elora adjusted the stabilizers, her fingers a blur. Daniel manned the cannon controls, the console vibrating under his grip. The warship loomed closer, shields glowing like molten armor. "Now!" Elora shouted. Daniel fired. A spear of plasma ripped across the void, slamming into Reeker's flank. For a brief, glorious second, fire exploded across the enemy's hull. But the warship barely faltered, shrugging it off like a beast swatting a fly. The retaliation came swift and merciless. A blast tore through their side, blowing panels apart. The cabin filled with smoke and fire. Elora was thrown from her chair, crashing hard against the wall. "Elora!" Daniel shouted, choking on the smoke. She groaned, blood streaking her blue skin, but forced herself up. Her hair, tangled with soot, glowed faintly gold in the flickering alarms. She staggered to the controls. "Shields down, one more hit." Daniel pulled her upright. "Then we don't let him fire again." Through the cracked viewport, Reeker's ship loomed, predator over prey. Daniel's heart pounded. He thought of his life back on Earth. The garage, the diner, summer nights. He thought of Elora, silver eyes burning even through pain. He realized he'd never felt more alive than right now, standing on the knife's edge with her. He grabbed the manual steering, overriding the autopilot. "Buckle in." "What are you doing?" Elora demanded. "Closing distance. If his guns can't track us, maybe we make it. You'll kill us both." Daniel flashed her a crooked grin, wild and desperate. Better than giving up. He slammed the thrusters. The ship screamed as it rocketed forward, weaving between asteroid fragments. Reeker's cannons blasted, but at such close range, his targeting faltered. Shots grazed past, blinding arcs of plasma that lit the asteroid belt like lightning. "Closer," Daniel yelled. Elora's hands danced, rerouting power from the failing shields to the engines. "You're insane." Been told that, too. Their little ship shot beneath Reeker's warship, so close Daniel could see the scars along its underbelly. For one heartbeat, the giant guns couldn't aim low enough. Daniel squeezed the trigger. The cannon fired point-blank into Reeker's ventral engine. The explosion was blinding. Fire erupted, shards of metal spinning into the void. The warship staggered, its hull groaning as secondary blasts cascaded along its spine. But not destroyed. The beast still lived. Reeker's voice boomed across the comm, enraged. "You think this ends me? I will hunt you across galaxies. I will carve your bones into warnings." Another blast rocked Daniel's ship. Warning sirens wailed. The reactor core was breached. Elora slammed a hand down, cutting power to half the systems. The lights flickered. She turned to Daniel, face pale, eyes fierce. "We can't outrun him anymore. If the core goes, we'll take ourselves out before he gets a chance." Daniel's throat tightened. His hands trembled against the console. Then Elora's hand covered his. "Daniel," she whispered. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with something raw. "If this is the end, you should know. For 200 years, I believed no one would ever choose me again. But you did." He looked at her. Even through blood and ash, she was radiant, more than radiant. She was alive, defiant, beautiful in her brokenness. "I'd choose you 1,000 times," he said hoarsely. For a heartbeat, their hands remained entwined, eyes locked. In the middle of fire, death, and ruin, something infinite sparked between them. Then Elora pulled away, her voice sharp again. "If we survive this, it won't be luck. It'll be because we fight until the last second." Daniel nodded, adrenaline flooding his veins. "Then let's make our last second count." Together, they turned back to the failing controls, their ship groaning as debris rained across the void. The chase wasn't over. The fight wasn't done. But now, no matter how it ended, they were no longer two broken souls. They were one. The stars were quiet again. The asteroid belt stretched endlessly, glittering with cold fragments of ice and stone. No cannons fired. No engines roared. Only the groan of a crippled ship limping through darkness. Daniel slumped against the console, chest heaving, smoke stinging his lungs. His ears rang with the echo of the last explosion. Every bone in his body felt rattled, every muscle trembling. For a moment, he thought they hadn't made it, that the afterlife looked a lot like empty space. Then Elora coughed beside him, a fragile, human sound, so small in the void, but it filled him with relief so sharp it hurt. He turned. She sat half-collapsed in her chair, hair tangled, streaked with soot. Her once radiant blue skin was marred by bruises and blood, yet her silver eyes still burned, alive. "You're still here," Daniel whispered. Her lips curled faintly, almost a smile. "And you're still reckless." Daniel laughed once, breathless, then winced at the pain shooting through his ribs. He checked the console. Warning lights flashed everywhere. Life support failing, oxygen dropping, engines crippled. They were floating on borrowed time. He leaned back, swallowing hard. "We hit him. We hurt him." Elora nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "But not enough. Reeker survives." The name hung heavy in the cabin, like the weight of centuries pressing in again. For a moment, despair threatened. What if it had all been for nothing? What if the galaxy's most relentless predator would simply rise again, stronger, angrier? Daniel shook his head. "We're alive. That matters." Every second we're alive, we still have a chance. Ellora looked at him, and this time, there was no hint of skepticism in her expression, just quiet trust. After 200 years of chains, someone had given her that much back. The silence between them deepened, no longer heavy but fragile, intimate. Around them, the ship hissed and sparked, the hull creaking like an old tree under a storm. Daniel rose shakily and crossed to a cracked panel where smoke leaked in steady plumes. He grabbed a tool, forcing the panel closed, sparks biting at his hands. Ellora started to stand, but he waved her back down. "Don't," he said. "You're hurt. Rest." "I've endured worse," she murmured, though her body betrayed her, trembling as she sank deeper into the seat. Chains bite deeper than fire. Daniel glanced at her, at the faint gold of her hair against the wreckage, at the stubborn set of her jaw. She had carried scars he couldn't see, but they were there, scars heavier than this failing ship. "You're free now," he said quietly. She blinked, as if the words were strange on her ears. Free. The word hadn't belonged to her for centuries. Slowly, she whispered it back, tasting it. Free. For the first time, she believed it might be true. The console beeped, pulling Daniel back. Oxygen reserves, 23%. Engines, offline. Reactor, unstable. "Not much time," he muttered. "We need somewhere to land, regroup, breathe." Ellora stirred, pushing past her pain. Her hands hovered over the navigation controls, coaxing what little life remained in the system. A star map flickered to life, jagged with static. She tapped one point, dim and distant. "There," she said, "a mining outpost. Abandoned decades ago. Supplies, shelter, maybe enough to repair." Daniel squinted at the coordinates. "How far?" Her eyes flicked up, guilty. "Farther than the engines can take us." For a long moment, silence pressed in. The black stretched endless outside the viewport, patient and merciless. Then Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we make them take us." One more push. Ellora stared at him. "You'd burn the last of the reactor. If it fails, it'll fail anyway." He cut in. "Better on our terms." She searched his face, as if looking for the flaw, the crack, the hesitation. But she found none. Just the stubborn resolve that had defied gold, defied a king, defied death itself. Slowly, she nodded. Together, they rerouted the remaining power. The ship groaned, lights flickering, the hull trembling as if alive. Daniel gripped the console, knuckles white. Ellora's hands brushed his as she secured the sequence, their touch unspoken reassurance. "Ready?" he asked. Her voice was steady now. "Always." He slammed the command. The reactor howled, the ship surging forward like a wounded beast refusing to die. Stars blurred, the asteroid belt shrinking behind them. The hull rattled, alarms screaming. Daniel's heart pounded. He thought the ship would tear apart around them. But still it flew. Minutes stretched into hours. Daniel lost track of time. His world narrowed to the flickering lights, Ellora's quiet presence beside him, and the endless pull of the coordinates ahead. At last, through the smoke-choked viewport, a shadow appeared. A station, drifting like a ghost in orbit of a barren rock. Its lights were dead, its hull scarred, but it stood. Relief flooded him, so suddenly his knees almost buckled. Ellora exhaled softly, silver eyes shimmering. They had made it. The ship groaned one final time as they docked, alarms fading into silence. Darkness swallowed the cabin. For a long moment, neither moved. The only sound was their ragged breathing. Then Daniel laughed, hoarse but alive. "Told you we'd make it." Ellora looked at him, and this time her smile was real, fragile but radiant. "You are impossible." He grinned back. "Takes one to know one." They sat there in the quiet wreck, side by side, battered and bruised, but unbroken. Reeker still lived, danger still loomed, but for this moment, just this stolen fragment of eternity, they were free. Together. The abandoned mining station smelled of dust and silence. When Daniel pried the hatch open, the stale air rolled out like a tomb. Every surface was coated in frost, the silence broken only by the creak of old metal settling after decades of emptiness. The lights refused to wake. The corridors stretched in shadows, haunted by the memory of workers who had long since fled. And yet, for the first time in days, Daniel could breathe without counting the dwindling numbers on a console. Oxygen here was thin, but it was air. Real, breathable air. He leaned against the bulkhead, exhaling, letting the cold seep into him. His body screamed for rest, but his mind refused to still. He could still see Reeker's burning eyes, the explosion tearing across the belt, the way Ellera had screamed his name as fire surrounded them. The galaxy hadn't changed. The warlord was still out there, but something in him had. Ellera's footsteps echoed softly behind him. He turned. She stood framed in the dim corridor light, her golden hair catching even the smallest shimmer, her blue skin pale with exhaustion but unbroken. She carried herself with the dignity of someone who had survived centuries of chains, and yet, now, there was something different in her posture. Not just survival, something closer to hope. "You should rest," Daniel said, his voice rough. Her lips curved faintly. "You say that, but you don't rest either." He chuckled under his breath, then shook his head. "Too much noise in here." He tapped his temple. Her silver eyes softened. She crossed the few steps between them, until he could see the faint traces of scars along her wrists where iron had bitten for 200 years. "The noise never leaves," she whispered. "Not completely. Even when the chains are gone." Daniel swallowed hard. He wanted to say something that would erase those centuries, that would give her peace, but there were no words big enough. He had only the truth. "You're not alone anymore." Her gaze locked with his, unflinching. For a long moment, the station was silent, time itself holding its breath. Then she nodded once, small but resolute. "And you're not, either." They sank into the quiet together, sitting on the cold metal floor, backs against the same wall. Neither needed to speak. The silence between them was no longer haunted. It was shared. For Daniel, reflection came like waves. He thought of Earth, of the life he'd left behind. He had once believed himself small, just another man in a world too vast to notice him. But here, among the stars, he had made a choice that no amount of gold could have bought. He had chosen Ellera, not out of pity, not out of duty, but because something in her reminded him of the simplest, most dangerous truth, that even in the void, connection mattered. He thought of his father's words long ago. "In the end, what we hold isn't wealth, son. It's the hands we refuse to let go of." Daniel smiled faintly, eyes closing. His father had never seen the stars, but somehow those words had guided him all the way here. Beside him, Ellera traced a finger absently over the frost on the floor, leaving trails that melted slowly. She didn't speak, but her silence said enough. He wondered what reflection lived in her now, whether she saw the chains that had bound her, or the horizon opening before her. After a long time, she whispered, "Do you ever wonder why people fight so hard for riches? For thrones, crowns, gold?" Daniel's eyes opened. He looked at her, then shook his head. "I used to think I wanted more, to matter, to prove something. But now..." He exhaled. "Now I think gold is what people chase when they've never felt something real." Her silver eyes shimmered, a galaxy in miniature. 2 centuries in chains, I dreamed of freedom. But the truth is, freedom means nothing if there's no one to share it with. Daniel felt something shift inside him then, a truth heavier than any treasure. Maybe the galaxy would remember Reeker's name. Maybe it would remember the kings and empires. But he knew, somewhere in the silence of history, that what mattered was this moment, here, with her. A human and an alien, scarred and stubborn, daring to believe they weren't alone. The mining station groaned softly, as if echoing the thought. Daniel tilted his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. His body finally allowed itself to rest, but his mind carved this moment deep inside him. Ellera's voice, soft as a breath, came in the dark. "You risked everything for me. What?" He opened one eye, gazing at her through the dim light. A half-smile tugged at his lips. "Because some things are worth more than everything." Her expression broke, just a little. Not pain, not grief. Something gentler, rarer. Her hand shifted across the floor until her fingers brushed his. She didn't need to say thank you. He didn't need to hear it. Outside, the stars spun on, vast and indifferent. But here, in this forgotten station, 2 souls carried something greater than any empire. The certainty that even in the coldest void, humanity, love still burned. The mining station had become more than shelter. Over weeks, it transformed into something almost human, a home. Daniel repaired old generators, coaxing power through veins of copper that hadn't carried life in decades. Elora explored the forgotten wings of the station, mapping out chambers that once held machinery, now only echoes. Where there had been silence and frost, laughter sometimes spilled now, quiet and raw, as if both of them were still learning what it meant to laugh freely. The galaxy beyond remained dangerous. They knew Reeker would rise again, that his empire of fire was not finished. But in the narrow halls of that station, time stretched differently. It was a reprieve carved out of chaos, a pause between storms. One evening, Daniel stood on the station's outer deck, the stars vast and burning across the void. Earth was somewhere out there, a blue he might never see again. He thought about Houston, about baseball games on humid nights, about the smell of coffee in his father's diner. He thought about the boy he had been, the boy who never dreamed of war, who never expected to leave his planet. Then Elora stepped beside him. Her presence filled the silence without breaking it. The starlight touched her hair, gold against sapphire skin. She looked not at the stars, but at him. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. Daniel smiled faintly, hands resting on the rail. "Leaving Earth?" He shook his head. "No, Earth's still in me. Every choice I make comes from there. My father's words, my mother's stubbornness, the smell of rain on asphalt. That's what I brought with me." He turned, meeting her silver eyes. "And if I hadn't left, I never would have found you." Her lips parted, a breath catching in her chest. "After so long, I thought chains were all I had left. You reminded me I was still someone, still alive." She reached for his hand. He didn't hesitate. Their fingers intertwined, warm against the cold metal of the deck. For a long time, neither spoke. They didn't need to. The galaxy remained uncertain. There would be battles to fight, wounds to mend, losses to endure. But in this fragile moment, standing side by side, Daniel and Elora had something even kings could never command: the choice to belong to one another. And that was worth more than all the gold in the universe. Years later, whispers spread across the outer colonies. They spoke of a human who had defied a king, who had chosen a chained woman over treasure, who had walked into fire and returned with a legend at his side. Some called him foolish, others called him mad. But among the forgotten, the enslaved, the broken, the story spread like wildfire. That no matter how vast the darkness grew, someone, somewhere, still chose love over gold, loyalty over power, humanity over fear. And that story gave people something they hadn't dared to hold in a long time: hope. Back in the station, Daniel woke to Elora's soft voice one morning. She sat at the edge of the bed, brushing her tangled golden hair. "When the time comes, when Reeker rises again, we'll fight him. Together." Daniel sat up, watching her. The fire in her silver eyes was not the fire of vengeance. It was the fire of someone who had finally remembered how to live. He nodded, reaching for her hand again. Together. And in that word, in that promise, they both understood. The war might scar them, the void might test them, but whatever future awaited, it was no longer endured alone. If you've ever believed in an impossible love, if you've ever wanted to see humanity shine brightest in the darkest places, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories waiting, and your voice in the comments helps keep them alive. Tell me what you felt about Daniel and Elora. The narrator's voice would say, would you have chosen gold or her?